Hello and welcome to the third episode of our second series of our New South Wales Life member interviews. Today we've been fortunate enough to be joined by a former first grade touch judge and former test match touch judge, Bob Garwood. How are you, Bob?
Daniel, I'm very well, thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. How are you? What do you do to keep yourself busy in your spare time?
Busy, there's lots of spare time these days, Daniel, and busy is a sort of a question mark. I just plod along fairly quietly these days. My wife and we go for a walk every morning before breakfast for an hour or so. That's about the only physical stuff I do. The rest of it's sort of, we go out to lunch a few times, a couple of times a week. Very sociable existence we have these days. Otherwise it's sort of, crosswords, and for Father's Day, actually, my kids gave me a subscription to the New York Times crossword, Daniel. So that's been something that comes up every day and has been somewhat difficult to to work on, but it's a bit of a challenge. But yeah, so these days, it's pretty well a social existence for me.
And before COVID, did you do much travelling? You enjoyed travelling?
We did get a bit of a taste for travelling, yes indeed, Daniel. Yeah, the slide on the screen there is Linda and myself in Vienna, having coffee at one of their lovely coffee shops. We did quite a few. We got a taste for cruising, so we did the river cruise, Alaska, cruised the Baltic and the Mediterranean, and so we did do quite a bit of travelling before COVID.
Sounds fascinating.
We have a couple of kids now. Our youngest fellow lives in Sweden, where our two grandchildren are, and our daughter is currently in the States. So there's always something to attract us overseas. But
Okay.
At the moment, not on, of course.
So you're well versed in Skype and FaceTime and those kind of things before
Indeed
COVID rolled around.
Indeed, we are, Daniel.
So you're retired now, as you mentioned. Can you give us a brief overview of what working life was like for you throughout your career?
Yeah, I did the leaving certificate in 1958, and I went to work at the Sydney County Council, which was the electricity distribution authority in those days, as a clerk. That was pre-computer days, so everything you calculated everything in your head and wrote it all out longhand. And I loved it. There were a lot of people there. There was a fair variation of the work in those days because, before the computers, you had to do a lot of your own work. And I enjoyed it. I was there 32 years. I had 30 terrific years. And then corporatisation sort of snuck in, and the service side of things fell apart a bit. And they were offering redundancies, and my wife urged me to take it because she was sick of me coming home complaining every night about how bad things were. So I did that, and then I worked I was married quite late, so at that stage I had 3 kids, none of whom were at school. But I landed on my feet. I went to work for the TAB, actually, Daniel, working for local agents as when they needed a day off, or, sort of part of a day off and that sort of thing. And that was terrific. I really liked that because I had an interest in racing. It was like going to the races every day. And I did that for 20 years. I did that till I was 70. So, and I really enjoyed that as well. So that was me. Two jobs in 50 odd years, Daniel.
Okay. And I remember hearing about your first job. There were a few fellow referees that were in that line of work.
The County Council was a big organisation. Yeah, a lot of people worked there and a lot of referees. Yeah, when I was there, we had Keith Page, Bobby Stiles and Steve Nash, God rest them all. They were all there together. Mario Caffarelli worked there. Okay. And there was an amalgamation of councils a little bit later on, and Barry Cross also finished up there. So, and Tommy Delorney, of course, who I ran with quite a lot in those early days, was also there. So, yeah, big group of referees in the council.
Yeah. Now, not too many may know, but you actually have also umpired cricket in the lower grades. How did this come about, and what was your journey like here?
Well, it was terrific. Cricket was one of the joys of my life, of course, and I played for over 20 seasons before I was married, and always coached and managed kids' sides. And I had a bit of involvement when my daughter played for a few seasons. But when I left work, my wife is a nurse. She was still working a couple of days a week, and I thought that if I got my ticket, I could do some schoolboy games. So I did. But they didn't have enough umpires at that time to cover all their games. There's 10 games of grade cricket, there's 20 teams, and they have 5 grades. And one of their top first grade umpires at the time was an old high school mate of mine, Jeff Garland. So I was persuaded, because Brian Wiseman also umpired, as did Johnny Colwell, another ex-graded referee. So I was persuaded to do Saturdays. And that was, I never regretted that at all. Because I'd stayed for 5 seasons, and it was terrific. I loved it. Loved it.
Yep. And do you think some of your grounding, some of the skills you had from refereeing rugby league and touch judging, they transferred and helped you over in cricket?
I'd say, yeah. From the point of view of maintaining your concentration,
man management,
reading the body language a bit. You sort of you had that knack of just dropping in the odd comment if you thought things were getting a little bit out of hand. We said didn't do much in the lower grades of cricket. It was competitive, but generally they were fine. But you had the opportunity to say to the skippers, look, the amber light's blinking, skip, you'd be wise to do something before it turns red. And generally that sort of thing was enough to achieve the desired effect.
Yep. And cricket was something that's run through the Garwood veins?
Mine, yeah. Neither of the boys played, but my daughter was very keen for quite a few seasons, probably from about 12 to 18, and then of course she left and headed overseas. She was quite good, and I was involved when she was playing, of course. Yeah.
Yep. Now we move along to your rugby league career. Now you're mostly known for your time at Canterbury Referees, but you actually started refereeing back in the CYO. Why did you start refereeing, and can you tell us some of those younger members who wouldn't know a lot about it, what was the CYO?
CYO was a Catholic youth organisation, Daniel. They were very big in sport, and they had tennis, basketball, netball, as well as rugby league. The CYO rugby league competition was very, very strong. Went from the war years to the late 70s. Very big on numbers, and very big on ability. A lot of very, very good footballers. The Australian Test captain in the 50s, Dick Poole, was a CYO referee. Was CYO player, I mean. And Test halfback of the late 60s, 70s, Dennis Ford, also came through CYO footy. I actually started refereeing because I was coaching at Canterbury and little grades, under 10s, under 12s, and in those days the minimum age was 21. So the referees you saw were all, men, and they always looked to be having a good time. It looked to be a pretty enjoyable thing, and I thought, this could be worth having a crack at this. So I got my ticket, as you see there, in 65, and I joined Canterbury, but you couldn't referee if you'd had anything to do at all with the club. So I was a non-active member, but 66 I did the trials and was ready to go. But the team I was coaching, the guy who was going to take over, it didn't work out. I had a couple of, begging phone calls. So I went back and coached them for another season or two. But I remember then that the CYO only played on Sundays. So I got a clearance. I stayed non-active member of Canterbury, and I got a clearance to referee in the CYO. And I did that all the way through. And after a couple of seasons, the team I was coaching, they went their separate ways, and Canterbury there was always a lot of games. So I got I made an application to the New South Wales referees to be able to referee in both Canterbury and the CYO. Okay. And I was the first referee to be able to be simultaneously active in 2 associations. So I did Canterbury on Saturday and the CYO Sunday. Okay. And I did that for quite a few years. Until I got graded. Yeah.
And were you the last referee to get graded from the CYO?
I was indeed, yes. By that time, it was starting to fade a bit, although I still refereed players who went on to first grade, and the very last game I did in CYO was a grand final in 73 between Marrickville and Lane Cove, and Phil and Les Cooley played for Marrickville. Les Cooley went on to play first grade with Newtown. And Phil was a very, very smart footballer and would easily have made grade, but, he had other inclinations. And for Lane Cove, they had twin brothers by the name of Coleman, And certainly one of those at least played first grade with Norths, and they may well have both done, but certainly one did. So still at that time in '73, there were very, very good footballers in the CYO comp.
And there was a few first grade referees to come from the CYO.
Yeah, well, when I got graded, Phil Ellis, Jack O'Sullivan, Neil Clement and Johnny Kelly were all still running. Phil had refereed first grade. He was back on the line by that time. Bill Kelly, John's elder brother, had retired just before I got graded. He also refereed first grade, and going back to earlier days, Jack Winchester had been a first grade player with Balmain, and he also refereed first grade. And Billy Kelly had been a first grade. He'd been a representative player, played for Balmain and played for Sydney before he took up refereeing. Okay. So yeah, they'd been because the football was so strong. It sort of produced some very strong referees. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you work your way in the junior reps, as we call it, like all referees do, doing the SG ball and the lower grade competitions. You actually, before you get graded, you do the lines in the 1970 and 1971 President's Cup. What are your memories of these experiences?
Well, 70, of course, was at the cricket ground. That was a terrific experience. It's always great to be on the cricket ground. And that was an exciting game, as you see there. Manly won that game by a point, and Souths were very strong in juniors in those days, and it was unusual for them to get beaten. And that was Manly's first ever win in the President's Cup. There we are, leaving afterwards. That's Tom in the centre, Noel Soslovsky on the right, and myself. But it was a terrific day. And it was always great to be on the cricket ground. The cricket ground in those days was the epitome of our game, and it was terrific to be on there. And that was before a test match between Australia and Great Britain. Yeah. So it was a big day. You can see from the crowd there, even that early, there was a lot of people there to see that game.
I was going to say, for someone early on in their career, like running at the SCG with quite a number of people there, would have been particularly exciting.
Actually, I was blessed because I was there the week before. The week before both semis were played there, before a Great Britain New South Wales game. So, but I wasn't on with Tom. I was on with Greg Hartley the week before. But I backed up again, and then the next year the games were played at President's Cup final were played at Henson Park the next year, and Greg Hartley refereed, and away we went again. And honestly, I was lucky that year because I'd been in the centre. I was sort of brought back to the line for that semi-finals and finals after being in the centre pretty well, right through.
Now you were graded in 1974 as member 645. What are your memories of this time?
I was probably on the last chance. Daniel, because after those two President's Cup lines, I'd been in the centre for the next couple of years in the junior reps without really, without getting graded. But in 74, I got to the last trial. Luckily, the system was the associations used to nominate people for grade trials, and then the appointments board would sort of, go through them. And they sort of get rid of a few each week of the 4 or 5 weeks of the trial. So I was still there the last week. I was on at North Sydney with Terry Murphy, and I shared a trial. And I was lucky to go on first. The players were fresh and keen and did the right thing. By the time Terry got on there, they were a little bit more weary in the second half. But anyhow, I was lucky enough to get graded in 74, and I felt great. I'd been sort of, as I thought, on the verge for a few years without really, actually making it. But 74, I was lucky. I got graded with Bruce Apps, as is marked there, Barry Bradstock, Bob Coffey, Lionel Green and Bob Govich. They were the 6 of us who got graded. And there's a bit of a quirk there in that Bruce Apps, Lionel Green, Bobby Govich and myself were all association secretaries at the time, 4 of us. That was a bit of a little oddity in that group of 6. Yeah. Both Barry Bradstock and Lionel Green went on to referee first grade during their careers, so that was good.
That's very interesting. I suppose it shows how the group of gentlemen managed, I suppose, juggling both commitments off the field and on the field.
Yeah, it was a little oddity of that year.
Mhm. So, what point in your career did it become clear that the touchline was the way forward for you?
Daniel, I remember it as clear as mud. I'd sort of stayed in the centre for the best part of 4 seasons. I did half a dozen reserve grade side games at one stage without sort of taking the next step. I stayed in the centre. I was, you seesawed between second division and third grade, and I was on third grade game. I was probably under 23s at that stage, halfway through the 77 season at Penrith and Norths. I thought it was a good game. We were buzzed along. I was quite happy. I didn't think I missed much. I was enjoying the game, and then in the second half, from what I thought was nowhere, there was a one-on-one tackle by Norths on a Penrith player who finished up sort of straddling the defender on it. Anyhow, this guy throws the ball around and he away and unleashed a flurry of punches on this poor defenceless bloody Norths bloke. And of course, the stoush followed. And I sort of, as it quietened down, I made up my mind that I'd have to get rid of the Penrith guy because it bordered on thuggery what he'd done. I hadn't seen anything else of any great note, but both touch judges, Ron Atkinson and the wonderful Billy Halebert, on my line, and they both had the same report. They had one player who they said had run in from 15 metres away and belted a Norths player who was being held by other Penrith players who dragged him out of the. So I thought that was a bit off as well. So I hunted him as well. And just after that, after we restarted, there was a Norths player who made this half-hearted sort of high tackle on a guy. Wouldn't have knocked your grandmother's hat off, but I called him out and I gave him the old, have you got short-term memory loss? Did you not see what just happened? And penalised him. Anyhow, when I got back to the room, the club secretaries used to have a book that they brought down when you sent players off to you to write the charge and sign. And I barely got into the room when the Penrith secretary was there. With the appointments board man, there was an old Penrith identity. And they were able to tell me with microscopic detail, Daniel, that I'd missed, and not only had I missed a Norths player making mayhem in the stoush, but it was the same bloke who I later cautioned for this half-hearted head-eye tackle. So I figured I left the ground thinking that, the red pen would have been out, I think, on the Monday night. But, so that was it. That was my last centre in grade. I didn't get back. But, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. We all go through ups and downs, but then as a touch judge, you certainly made the most of it, and you make your first grade debut in 1978. It's the round 7 match between Newtown and Cronulla at Henson Park.
Yep.
John Gosher was the referee, and the highly experienced George Benson was on the other line. What are your memories of the start of your first grade career?
It was a very exciting time, of course. To first grade was what we all aimed at. We all aimed to get there with a whistle, of course, but 2-1 against you. But yeah, it was exciting. I was lucky to survive. Actually, I was lucky to survive the first 3 games I did. But that was a Saturday game, and Cronulla and Newtown, it was a good game. The ABC used to do a 6 o'clock replay of the Saturday game leading up to their news, and you didn't encroach onto the field in those days, and there was an unsuccessful penalty attempt by Cronulla, and Newtown had a very, very smart 3-quarter centre winger, Nark Wright. So he's caught the ball in the in goal and taken off towards my line at an angle. As I said, you didn't encroach onto the field, so I whiz across the dead ball line so I can look down the touch line, and he gets tackled about 30 metres out, and I knew from the reaction of the players that he'd gone out, but I couldn't see. So we played on. And luckily, we went across the tennis club next door and had a look at the replay after the game that night, and luckily it didn't come up. So I got away with that one. And the next game I did, the second game was down at Brookie, and that was a Manly Souths game, and that was a physical bit of physical good fortune because Don McDonald sent off Graham Eady and John Gibbs, who were both internationals for Manly. Sent them both off, and poor old Neil Clement was on the far side at the end of the game, thank the Lord, because they came over the fence. They used to come onto the ground in those days to cheer their heroes, but we weren't amongst them those days. They didn't want to cheer us at all. So I was lucky physically that day. It was good to get off the ground.
Yeah. Oh, well, I suppose you make your own luck and all the achievements that come from that. Now, who were some of the big influences for you coming through from the lower grades, your local association, right through your first grade career?
Well, of course, I was lucky that I had sort of support from two angles. From the CYO guys who were all in grade were pleased that the association had broken through again, you know, to have another one graded. And the Canterbury guys also, Johnny Farrelly at Canterbury was a fellow who, like Phil Ellis, had refereed first grade and was now a first grade touch judge. He was a terrific mentor, great support. There are other people at Canterbury who were similarly supportive. And of course, the guys, your own sort of peers, you know, guys like Col Turnell and Peter Longhurst and Les Matthews and those fellows, they were always there to sort of cheer you on when you're going well, and honest enough to tell you why when you weren't going well. So they were always a great support as well. It was terrific. They were terrific times.
Now, we tend to, as you mentioned there, form our strongest friendships with those from our grassroots and our local associations. You mentioned Col Turnell and the blokes of that ilk. Who were some of the names you enjoyed running with from grade and from Canterbury and the CYO?
I always enjoyed running with the guys who sort of took what they were doing seriously, but without taking themselves too seriously.
Yep.
It was always good fun when you're on with, you know, someone like Johnny Blomfield and Doug Winton and in the lower grades, you know, we had Terry Murphy and Peter Pearce and those guys. And from Canterbury, of course, Les Matthews was a great character who sort of was very keen when the footy was on, but always good for a laugh sort of afterwards. And they were the guys that I really enjoyed my days, particularly in the second division, because I spent a bit of time there, and it was important that, you know, that you could lighten up the day when you're in second division with a few of those guys. Billy Hale, but I mentioned, was on that line in my last game. Billy Hale was a terrific referee who never ever sort of, you know, just clicked, but he had the idea that to be a good referee, you had to have eyes in your backside, and consequently, Billy had an eye tattooed on each of his buttocks. Yeah, but he was that sort of a character, you know, funny man, and it was always good to be on with those guys.
Yep, I've met Billy a few times. He's a Parramatta Life member. He's a very funny man and an absolute gentleman as well.
He was. And a terrific referee was Billy Hale. But there are a lot of good referees who, you know, just didn't, I wouldn't say didn't get an opportunity. Everyone got an opportunity, but, you know, if you happen to have an ordinary game at the wrong time in grade, well, you know, that was, appointments board guys in the old days were a bit unforgiving, and they tended to think that, you know, there was no, once you had a bad game, that was your standard. There was very little, from some of the appointments board guys, there was very little recognition that you could improve or do better. You know, they sort of marked you if they saw you in what they thought was not a particularly good performance. Next time your name came up, they tended to say, oh, you know, sort of, not Bob Garwood again, sort of thing. You know, that was the attitude. So there were a lot of good referees who sort of, you know, didn't quite get as far as they might have done in grade.
Yeah, I think that's the important message. I think there's two words there that you mentioned for any aspiring match official, whether it's just to go to the next grade, whether to get graded, whether to do first grade. I think you need timing, and I think you also need a bit of luck along the way.
Of course, yeah.
Yep. Now, you touched on it briefly, but what are some of your memories of those early games, establishing yourself and finding your feet in first grade? What was the step up like? It was a lot faster, tougher?
It was faster in terms, they don't run faster, Daniel, but they react and do things faster. And that's what, you know, can really catch you out. I remember the third game I did was at Penrith, was Balmain and Penrith game. It was one of the fastest games I was ever on. It was finished up a draw, something like 24 all. And fairly late in the game, there'd been, Balmain had the ball and they were tackled right on my touchline, maybe 20 metres out. And I thought, oh, this is all right, I'll just have a spell here. The ball will go across the back line the other way. I'll just sort of stand here and watch the guys, watch the back play, and the kick will go the other way. And while I'm thinking that, Neil Whittaker was a Balmain hooker who went on to become the CEO of the Rugby League. He's done a big dummy and spin from about 2 metres inside the touchline whizzed down the touch line and dived over in the corner. And I'd only got taken 2 steps by that time. I was astonished. So, there was a flurry of bodies, and I just dawdled up and stood there as if I knew what I was doing. And but the thing is, they react. They do things so much quickly, so much more quickly they react and read the play and anticipate. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's just what you've got to get used to. You sort of can't, once you get to, well, you can't, whenever you're touch judging or refereeing, you can't really relax, but you do. But as sure as you do in first grade,
Yep.
something will happen and you get caught out. Yeah. And it's because of that speed of reaction, more so than, as I said, they don't run any faster, but they certainly react quicker.
Yeah, that split second, if you switch off, you start half a step behind and it very quickly becomes 5 to 10 steps. Now, I've got a bit of vision on here of Henson Park, and I've got Henson Park behind me. You make your first grade debut there. You have a bit of an affinity with Henson Park throughout your career. It's one of your favourite grounds.
I did Henson Park lots and lots of times. Yeah, lots of things I in my career happened at Henson Park for some reason or other. I don't know. It was interesting. I did a game there some years later with the visiting English referee Mick Norton. Came out to do a state of origin game. They went through that period where they had English referees coming out to do the state of origin games, and Mick refereed Newtown and North to sort of to warm up, and Phil Ellison and I ran his line. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Now it doesn't actually.
A lot of my games occurred at Henson Park.
Now, it doesn't actually take you too long to establish yourself and start to get some bigger games in the top grade. In 1979, you had the honour of running with Kevin Roberts in the New South Wales versus Great Britain match at the SCG. What was that experience like?
Terrific experience. It came at an odd time, because in those days when the touring teams came out, they go around the country and they come to Sydney and they play Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Then they go to Queensland and do a similar thing. And this match was before the third test. Actually, they played a couple of tests, so it was a little bit unusual in that regard. But some terrific players there. And it was an odd side. The selector shows an odd side because you'll see there that both Steve Mortimer and Steve Morris played. They were both halfbacks. And there was a funny happening. Sort of Steve Morris was kept out of the game for a long while. It was late in the game before he got an opportunity. And he was that keen. He was on Bert Reedy was on the far side, and Steve Morris came up and said, "I'm coming on," and there was a scrum, and he just bolted on Steve Morris. He was that keen. So poor old Bert follows him on. And I just went on from where I was on my side. I said to Kevin Roberts, "Hang on, Kev, I've got a replacement coming on from the other side." So the players were all keen. The scrums didn't muck around in those days. So Steve Morris races over. Steve Mortimer gives him the ball and walks off my side. And the ball goes straight in the scrum. Kevin packs the scrum. Poor old Bert's about level with a 5/8 by this time, trying to get off on the other side. He finished up herring off with the ball following him. It was quite funny. Funny for me, wasn't too funny for Bert.
Now, you mentioned Kevin Roberts was the referee. You got to run with many very, very good referees over your career. Kevin Roberts, the late Jack Danzy. Just a comment on Kevin Roberts?
Kevin refereed the first game I did in grade, actually, as it turned out. It was a third grade game at Cumberland the year I got graded, 74. That was my first appointment. Brian Wiseman was on the other line. Kevin was, as anyone would run with it, he was a terrific referee. Great rapport with players. He'd been a first grade player himself. But rules weren't his strong point. And on that very first game, players, we used to do short kickoffs in those days. They'd do the short kickoff. And the kickoff to start that third grade game didn't go 10 metres. So I put my flag up and I went about 7 metres just to make sure that Kev could see that it was clearly hadn't gone the 10. Anyhow, he kept running and jogging, coming over. And he came all the way up to me and he said, "Where's the penalty?" and as you went on with Kevin, terrific fella, terrific referee, but rules weren't his strong point. The thing for refereeing that Kevin did, he became the number one referee at the end of a somewhat turbulent period in our footy and in our refereeing. And I think his contribution to restoring refereeing to a high level of acceptance and was terrific. He really established refereeing once again as something to be applauded and admired. We did go through a period where that wasn't the case. He was a good referee, terrific referee, great rapport with players, could read the game well, yeah. And good fun to be with too. Kevin was always good fun after the game.
And I think probably an important trait in that is just the way he carried himself and the persona he had. I mean, without being arrogant, having a presence and having that sort of public image, I think he carried himself quite well.
Yep. Yeah, he was kind of funny. When I said I never refereed after that third grade game, the closest I went, I was on a game with him at Leichhardt, and both the lower grade referees were out of action. Michael Thompson was ill, and Lionel Green broke down. So I was a standby referee for the first grade, Daniel, the standby referee. And I said to him a couple of times when there was a try scored, how you going? Feel all right? Yeah, he said, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. So I did the second time, you sure okay? He said, yeah. So when we come off at half time, he said, what the bloody hell you keep asking me if I'm all right for?
Yeah. That's good. Now, another appointment of note early in your career is the City versus Country seconds in that same year. Do you have any memories from that fixture?
I do. That was at the cricket ground. John Kelly and I did that game. They used to have, the country referees used to have their AGM at Phillip Street on the day of the City Country game because they'd all come down for the game. So we went to that. Tommy Gustard refereed that game. He had a reputation of being a little bit prickly to Tom. He was fairly blunt. But he refereed the house down that day. You wouldn't have got a better performance from a referee than Tommy Gustard showed that day. He was just terrific that day. It was a game that sort of, he let flow. He got some terrific advantages. He let these guys do what they were there to do, which was try and impress the state selectors. And I just thought that day he was terrific, Tommy Gustard.
And some really strong names. Looking at the team list there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there was some really good footballers in the side. I mean, you had John Dyer. He was always one to help you out with lots of decisions. And there were a few others there. That was a really good game. I enjoyed the game, and I enjoyed the day. Once again, you're at the cricket ground. You're surrounded by the history of the game at that time. Everything big that happened in our game up to that time happened at the cricket ground. So to be out there again, was terrific. Great experience. And that was my first, in inverted commas, representative game, of course.
Now, 1981 is a highly successful year for yourself, touch judging the City Country and then Australia versus France Test match. We'll talk about the City Country first. Now, this was played at Bruce Stadium in Canberra. Was that the first City Country there?
It was, yeah. That was the first time it had been played away from Sydney. Pardon me, and it was played there because Canberra were coming into the competition the next year, and it was played down there to try and just keep the interest going. We flew down. Everyone flew down in the morning of the match. Johnny Gosha, Ross Collins was the other touch judge. Ross Collins was a dead ringer for Kevin Juni. I don't know you remember Kevin Juni. He was a great Eastern Suburbs player of the 70s. Kevin, he was a dead ringer for him. Peter Longhurst was on the second on the seconds, and we had a look around. We were there fairly early, and at that time, the Australian Institute of Sport had really just commenced. Bruce Stadium was within the fairly new Australian Institute of Sport. So we had a wander around. We were looking to see what was there. Peter and I, and we opened one door, and there's a team of young players from the under-18 game, which was on first, getting ready. And strapping them was a bloke called Buck Rogers, who'd been an old St Mary's bloody stalwart for you. Peter and I had both got plenty of bloody controlled experience refereeing Buck Rogers many times. One of those guys. And, he sort of looked up and recognised us. We had a bit of a chat. And one of the young players said to him, you know, how come you know these, we had our blazers on, of course, how come you know these shitty guys? Well, Sonny said, if I was still playing, I'd have a permanent seat with my name on it at that bloody judiciary every Monday night. And exactly, he was dead right. He would have done. After I just, he played with St Mary's for 100 years. Yeah. So that was funny.
It's funny. We often come across characters like that in this game.
Yeah.
Now, another important fixture or highlight that comes at the SCG is the 1981 Test match between Australia and France. Now, you do this game with Brian Gately, I believe, was the other touch judge, and the New Zealand referee, Kevin Steele. Yeah,
Kevin Steele. Yeah, it was a bit odd because Kevin Steele's actually a Sydney boy. He played for Enfield Federals, and he went to New Zealand for work, and became their top referee over there, and that was why. That was in the at the time when that obnoxious term neutral referee started to be bandied around, Daniel.
Because did he also do a state of origin in the early days?
He may well have done, yes. I think. I'm not too sure. Not too sure.
Thompson from England, I think.
Yeah,
a few neutral referees earlier.
Billy Thompson, another English referee. His name escapes me. Robin something or other.
Robin Whitfield.
Robin Whitfield, that was him. Yeah, he came over. I don't think Kevin did, but it's very sad because within probably, I don't know, less than 2 years, Kevin passed away. He had an undetected heart condition, and quite suddenly in New Zealand, he had a heart attack and passed away. I went to his funeral. Kevin, Ian McCall and I. He was buried in Sydney at St Joseph's in Enfield. Ian McCall and I went to his funeral, so that was quite sad. But he was quite a young man, of course.
Yeah, he would have been. Now, what were your memories of this experience? A fantastic photo of you in the corner.
It's great. Oh, yeah. Good positioning as always, mate. You know, I mean, not many of us get the opportunity. There's less and less international football. Not many of us get the opportunity to do a test match. And even less of us get the opportunity to do a test match involving France. They were probably not as strong at that time as they had been in years gone by, but it was a terrific experience to be in a test match at the cricket ground. And as I say, look back and the great names that are in that side when you look at the program. I mean, Michael Cronin, Wally Lewis, they're all-time greats of our game, aren't they?
Well, this is actually your personal copy. Now, you told me a story about Tom Ballou.
That's my personal copy with all the signatures. Yeah, Tom Ballou, who's an old refereeing identity, fortunately for us, was the Australian team manager, and he came in at the end of the game and collected the program, off Brian Gately and myself, and got everyone to sign. So that was a great keepsake. I have it here. My young bloke's determined to put it on eBay when I'm gone.
No, it's an excellent keepsake. Wouldn't be selling that. Now, also, we've got a program from the next day. This is how hard you worked back in those days. You actually backed up at the cricket ground the next day in first grade.
I didn't. I was on the next day at the sports ground, mate. So I could have stayed in the vicinity, couldn't I? Yeah. Ryan and I were on the next day at the sports ground. Quite a few of the players were there too. Kerry Boosted. They had him bracketed just in case he got injured the day before. But yeah, we backed up the next day at the sports ground. I don't know. Maybe it was, we might have been a bit short. Perhaps there might have been a few blokes out. I don't know. I don't think it was normal for that to happen, Daniel. But yeah, there we were.
Now we talk highlights over your 103 first grade games. Does this rank as probably the highlight, the Australia versus France Test match, or the Great Britain New South Wales?
Oh yeah, the Test match. It's the epitome of what we do, isn't it? And that will always be the highlight for me. I enjoyed all the games I did. I did the 2 City Country games, the New South Wales Great Britain game. I had those experiences. The State of Origin came in a little bit late in my career. I didn't do any State of Origins. I didn't do semi-finals. I was a standby one day with Barry Bradstock for the semi-finals, and we were the standby for the whole 3 games. We sat out there all bloody, and we had 3 changes of gear. What's more, the first and third grade wore the same colours, and the reserve grade wore a different one. Yep. So we were the standbys, but I didn't actually I didn't actually do any semi-finals, but nevertheless, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing. It was great.
Yeah. No, I
Just
think
matched to be on the top.
certainly looking back on your career, there's plenty of good memories there and plenty to be proud of. Now we'll head off the field now, and like many, you've jumped headfirst into administration roles and within Canterbury Referees and New South Wales over the years. Most notably from your time at Canterbury was your role as secretary. What makes you want to contribute to roles like this over the years?
Well, it's just, I think as you as you go through your time in the association, from when you start, you just have this feeling that this has got to go on. There was a history there, and a competence. The association was run very, very smoothly. At Canterbury, we had good rapport with the junior league and the district club. Everything went smoothly, and you just had this feeling that this has got to go on. We can't, we must keep this going. Something, and when the opportunity came up, Reg Dick had been the secretary for innumerable years. It's an amazing thing. When I finished as secretary in '96, in the previous something like 50 years, Canterbury had only had 3 secretaries, I think. Jack Eadie was there for a long time before Reg Dick, and I was there for a few years afterwards. So there was an enormous, there was a continuity of administration. But I felt probably from my days as a clerk that I was reasonably competent administrator, and I just had this feeling, Daniel, that you couldn't let the history be interrupted. You had to keep it rolling, and that was more or less the thinking, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a strange thing to explain to people outside refereeing, but I suppose in any of their pursuits as well, you kind of catch the bug, don't you?
You do,
and then
that's
you're just attached.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, someone who you served with was Les Matthews. You spoke about him a little bit before. Another absolute gentleman and someone who did an enormous amount for refereeing.
He did. Yeah, Les was a really, he was a go-getter as an administrator. He was the president of Canterbury and in the secretary or CEO downtown. And Les was like he was nipping at your heels all the time. He wanted things done, and he wanted them done the right way, and as soon as they could be done.
Yep. Now, a few of our fellow New South Wales Life members that I've spoken to have had the privilege of having awards named after them in their association. You share this honour with fellow Canterbury Life member Paul Archer. It's the Archer Gosha Award. It was introduced in 2016. Can you speak to its significance and what does it mean to you personally to have your name attached to that award?
Well, what can you say? The big plus, of course, is it's not the Garwood Memorial Trophy, Daniel, so that's a plus in itself. I mean, I was quite surprised. That was something that was announced at a Canterbury meeting without any inkling that I had beforehand. They decided to introduce it as an award for the people's contribution to the association. And I mean, what can you say? It was just, I was just overcome. It was a great honour to have that named after you, and particularly with Paul. Paul's been a stalwart of Canterbury for many, many, many. He was a very good referee, Paul. But he had a job in the trotting association that sort of prevented him going on to higher grades, but a very good referee, and he's been a great administrator at Canterbury for a long, long time. And similar to Les Matthews, there's no beating about the bush. Paul wants things done, and he wants them done the right way, and he wants them done, as soon as they can be done.
Yep. And he's still serving there, I believe.
He is still the president. Yes, he is. Yes, and it's now our centenary year at Canterbury next year, and Paul will go into the centenary year as the president, hopefully.
That's a nice feather in his cap. Now, for your contribution to Canterbury Referees, you awarded life membership in 1982, and then later the Leo Randall Award in 1999. This is a very esteemed award in that association. How dear do you hold both of these pieces of recognition?
Well, very highly. Life member, of course. I got life membership in '82 with the great Bob Stiles, who was lived quite close to me in Belfield. Bob and I both lived in Belfield, worked at Sydney County Council, and you know, he was just nature's gentleman. Bob, he loved refereeing. He put a huge amount into it. Life membership. What can you say? It's just a terrific recognition. You don't sort of set out to be recognised, but if it comes along, it's very gratifying. Leo Randall was a great stalwart of Canterbury referees in the old days. By the time I got to be involved, he was sort of just on the periphery. But he'd been responsible for a lot of progressive moves when he was president of Canterbury, and that association award named after him is very much you know, valued by those people that have won it. So that was a great recognition. Yep.
Yeah. And there's some very prestigious names, household names in Canterbury that have won that award. There
are, indeed. Yep.
Now, I would say, although that it's a New South Wales award, the Dennis Braybrook Memorial Trophy is awarded for service within the districts. You were awarded this back in 2005. What did this mean to you at the time, particularly as Dennis was probably someone that you had a bit to do with and ran with actively?
I did. I liked Dennis. I admired him immensely. We were pretty good mates. I did run with him quite a bit. That was, you know, at Canterbury at that time, I was probably involved in that popular position of chairman of the appointments board, Daniel. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed what I did at Canterbury, and to have that recognition, particularly from named after Dennis, was quite funny because it was always given out at the ladies' presentation night. And I wasn't going that year because my wife was going to be away that weekend. And unbeknownst to me, it was a secret award, of course. Les Matthews had been in touch with Linda to make sure we were going. And when she said we weren't, he said, oh, well, you know, can you get Bob to come? So she kept, you know, saying, why don't you go? I feel bad about you staying home when I'm going to be away. You know, why don't you go? And I said, I'm not going to go to the bloody ladies' night on my own, you know. So all the secret undermining was going on there that I was unaware of. But I didn't go. But Les brought the trophy out to a Canterbury meeting a short time later and presented it to me there. Yeah. But yeah, I loved getting that award. I loved the time I had with Dennis Braybrook. Actually, I went on to the advisory board in town for a couple of years. Because Dennis was there. I retired in '74, and Eric Cox was the director of referees, and in between the two
84?
seasons, sorry,
in '84,
sorry,
yep.
In between the two seasons, Eric retired, and Dennis was appointed the director of referees. And I wrote to him and said, you know, I'd nominated myself for the advisory board primarily for that reason, you know, because I admired Dennis's attitude and his outlook so much.
I think that's a good segue. You fulfilled that role, but other roles you fulfilled within New South Wales during the late '70s and the 1980s. Most of these were around the finance committee. What were some of the roles that you fulfilled?
Yeah, mostly. I think I was probably on the committee 1 year, in the finance committee for a while. It was around the time when incorporation was coming into things. I remember being involved in Canterbury as well. In those days, all amateur associations, you just had your officials, and it was pointed out, and it was probably came to pass in one or two areas that you were open to legal action if anything that you did upset anybody or, you know, brought them undone. And so legislation was changed to enable amateur bodies to be incorporated, so that if there was any legal action, the individuals were not going to be responsible. It was the organisation. It was a bit of bloody red tape involved, but yeah, probably most of the contribution that I made at that time was helping to sort that out, Daniel. Yeah.
Now, along with your active on field, this would have no doubt contributed to, in 1988, your game received probably the ultimate recognition for any association, being named a life member. Do you recall how you were informed and your feelings at the time?
Well, you were informed always at the annual meeting because the announcement was made there. There were nominations taken at the end of a season, and the committee used to meet as it did in all associations in the off season, and they would come back with their recommendations at that annual meeting, and then it would be voted on. Yeah, so Jack Jewell, he was a bit older than me. Jack had been involved for a lot longer than I had. He was in the country for a long while, but it was a wonderful feeling. It was terrific to receive that nomination and to receive the appointment of life membership. I mean, there are guys on the list of life membership who are legendary within the association, and it was just a wonderful feeling to be involved with them. Yeah.
And then you received your blazer at the Greyhound Club.
At the Greyhound Club, yes, a Greyhound Club at Lidcombe, adjacent to a footy ground there. We didn't go there too often, but yeah, the Greyhound Club. It was a very big night, very enjoyable.
Now, reflecting upon your 50 plus years of involvement, actually that reminds me, over 50 years, you would have been one of the a few people to referee unlimited tackles, 4 tackles, and the 6 tackle rule.
Yep, not many of us left that have done that, Daniel. 1966 was my first full season of refereeing, and that was the last season of unlimited tackle footy. 67 they switched to 4 tackle rules, and that became a little bit stop-start, so they changed to 6 tackles a couple of seasons later. But yeah, did all of that, and I refereed mini and mod as well. Mini and mod started in the mid to late 70s. And I was graded, of course, but a lot of the guys who'd refereed for quite a while, they looked at it as, as pretend football, and wouldn't do it. And at Canterbury, I remember Les and I got our heads together, and I think we grabbed 1 or 2 of the other graded blokes, and we actually volunteered. We refereed it for 2 or 3 weeks, to try and encourage people to get behind it. Yep. Yeah. So I did. I've refereed. I refereed all the styles of footy. That's right. Yep.
So I think that shows the longevity of your contribution over that 50-something years. What do you see as the most important thing that you've gained from refereeing?
Well, I mean, the friendships that you make is the main thing. That's terrific. There are guys that you sort of have been mates with for, decades and still are. I like to think that I've made a bit of a contribution, that I've helped a few guys along the way. That's the other thing. When I was on the board at Canterbury for quite a few years, and we were fortunate to get a few guys who sort of moved through the ranks and got graded, and that's always, you always like to think that you had some input into those sort of things, Daniel. But the friendships and the feeling of involvement and the feeling that you've actually, weighed in a little bit along the way, they're the things that you look back on with great pleasure.
Yeah. Well, you've been very insightful, Bob, and very thoughtful opinions on the game, and I've very much enjoyed this afternoon. But before we go, our fast 5 to finish off. What is your signature dish?
My signature dish would probably be Welsh rarebit, Daniel. Welsh rarebit, and there'll be people chuckling all over the place because that's actually cheese on toast. The kitchen is not my domain. Great.
I was expecting a toast comment from someone in the upcoming episodes, but there you go. Favorite holiday destination?
Probably Yamba. We love Yamba.
Okay. Up on the north coast. What's your perfect day off look like for you? You got plenty of them at the moment?
Yeah, no, probably just we with my wife. She loves to have a coffee out, mate. So the perfect day out would probably be wander downstairs and have a coffee somewhere and grab the paper, and we sit on the balcony. We now live in a unit over a shopping centre with an outlook over Ryde Oval and to the city. So we have a bit of a sit on the balcony and read the paper, and yeah, all very pleasant.
Sounds fantastic. Now, favourite sport outside of rugby league?
Well, I'm a great cricket fan. Bit of an avid cricket man. So yeah, I do love the cricket.
And if you could bring back one rule, what would it be?
I don't know. I don't know. But what I would like to see, not so much bringing back a rule. What I would like to see is to play the balls, sort of tidied up a bit, Daniel. I think particularly this year with the six again rule, players are desperate to get that ball played to try and get a six again, and there's been some scrappy. There's been blokes facing the sideline and playing the ball off their knee and that sort of thing, and to try and get it, try and get an advantage. Yeah. I would like to see us tidy that up a bit.
I think it's an emphasis of the modern game, speed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for your time today, Bob. As I said, absolutely enjoyable sitting here listening to some of your stories. Very insightful, very thoughtful, very entertaining perspectives on numerous experiences that you've had. Look after your wife and look after your family and stay in touch with them. And hopefully I'll see you sometime soon.
We hope so, Daniel. Yes, thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.